Hey guys, this is Patrick Carl Sadamoon. You might know me as the guy with the most IM medals in the world, or something like that. I'm also the CGO Fnatic, and you're watching Duncan Thorin Shields YouTube channel. Pleasure being here.
Right, this is going to be another episode of my donator discussion. People who are in the $100 or above Patreon tier can join a live discussion with me in which we talk about all sorts. Mainly it's set by the guests, you'll notice, unless I think it's just not an interesting question. Then sometimes I hijack it, and spoiler, I'm actually able to hijack any question I want into talking about whatever I wanted anyway, so don't worry about it. Why break the habit of a lifetime? So, as people may know who've listened to past episodes, not only do we go into whatever game and topic most of the people on the show want, but if anyone's new, we do it Fight Club style. They have to go first. So we've got Alex here, who's a first-time joiner of the donator discussion. Right, first of all, just give us a tiny bit of background, Alex. Like, what games are you following at the moment? What are your main esports games?
First and foremost, I've been watching CSGO for 9 years, actually.
Okay.
Also, I've been following League of Legends. I'm not following as much today, but I was watching it in 2014, 2018, something like this.
Okay.
And also I'm following Dota 2. I was watching Dota 2 since, I believe, TI3.
Right.
And sometimes I watch other games, like even PUBG tournaments.
Fair enough.
But it's like secondary tier for me.
Okay.
So,
for people who don't know, by the way, one of the actual quite unique things about Eastern Europe, because Alex is from, where are you from here, mate? Russia or Ukraine or something?
yeah, I'm from Russia.
Yeah, if people don't know, in that region, even though, listen, every country in the world has a lot of League of Legends players, the actual esports side, as far as I can tell from that, the many times I've been there, Dota 2 seems more popular than League of Legends. Would you agree?
Yes, I can agree on it. And let's say partially it's because of the land background,
Right.
Russia
Yes.
and Ukraine. And secondary is because of the way Riot Games interacts with community in those regions. I can go in depth later, but
No, it's okay. Yeah, we could do it. Listen, if you want to bring it up as a topic, you can. But yeah, I just wanted to go over the brief thing. So, okay, do you have a topic you'd like to start us off with in whichever of the games you're into? Do you have a big topic that's on your mind, mate?
Actually, I do. In terms of topics, basically it comes for my favorite game, CSGO. But anyways, I've been watching CSGO for a very long time. I believe I started watching CSGO in prime Fnatic time.
Okay.
I mean, like golden era of Fnatic, all of my streams and so on. And what I've noticed at that point of time is there were a lot of, let's say, countries and teams which were solid contenders for tournaments, like France, like Sweden, like TSM,
Sure.
and so on and so on and so on. Even like Navi were considered as contenders with Prime Guardian. Yeah. But for last year or so, I see that we have a lot of countries missing actually on the map, like Sweden for a very long time.
Sure, yeah.
Like France and so on. So what do you think about it? I mean, isn't it some kind of sign of, let's say, degradation of overall level of CSGO or maybe of the scene itself? Like, what is going on basically?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, as usual, if people don't know, people are free to jump in whenever they have a point or they want to continue. So, but I'll give my thoughts initially. So I would say the first thing, it's something I've been quite interested in myself in CSGO, is it seems like CSGO as a game is becoming a little bit more like some of the games you follow, like League of Legends and Dota, where you don't really typically tend to have region-based teams beyond things like, obviously, if people are going to speak Russian, you're going to have to at least probably come from a CIS country. But, you know, beyond that, you can see there are obviously many, many players who from CIS region who played in Western teams, for example, with like Americans, people from Europe, etc. And generally in those games, you don't typically have 5 from one country unless it is, like I say, like Southeast Asia or China or CIS just as a cultural region. So one of the reasons why I think we're headed more towards that in CSGO, and we've got so many sort of international teams at tier 2 now, is we don't really have a very good I would say like grassroots. Do you know what that term means, Alex? Grassroots?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I'm just checking. I don't always know which like terms go over. So yeah, basically we don't have a very good sort of like bottom layer to the scene, because if you know any of those other regions in past games like CS 1.6, the way you got to the top, even from a country like Sweden or Russia or France, is you play in your own country first and you go to the local lands and you get on a team, and then eventually you get on a team that can actually do something, and then hopefully you upset the big team from your country, or you play well against them, and then maybe the third best team in France, you know, picks you up to play on their team. If I asked someone right now, where does someone who isn't in Vitality or G2 go if they're a French player? Like, how would they get attention? Most people wouldn't have an answer, right? I mean, the best answer at the moment is like playing double pony, but then you go look who's in double pony. They're all people from like 5 years ago too. So if you look at it, I think unfortunately, no country, as far as I can tell, actually has like a proper sort of, funny, this is a term from League of Legends, just I don't believe it exists in League of Legends. They use the term path to pro. Like, how do you go from being a really good amateur to becoming a pro? Like, what are the actual steps you can take? And the difference is in 1.6, we had sort of like, the idea was, it was kind of like if you know how sports work in America. The idea in America goes like this. If I'm a young basketball player, I want to be really good in high school, so I get the attention of a college. Then I go to college, university, and I play really well there. And if I do well enough there, the NBA scouts me, and I can go in the NBA, or I'll go and play in the Euro League in Europe. The problem at the moment is it doesn't seem like you can just competitively join a league and then people actually are looking and you get their attention, you move up the scene. So unfortunately, I get the vibe, unless you are like Astralis or some team who try to have all five from one country, most people are going to just look around the scene and go, right. So an example actually might be Astralis. If they look around and they go, there aren't really any good AWPers we want. Well, the problem is, if they actually could sign Ziwu, they're probably better off going international, wouldn't they? They'd be better off just saying speak English, because we'd have Ziwu as our AWPer. Whereas if the option was to have Locky or Farlig or something, maybe that isn't as good. So unfortunately, I feel like for CSGO, the longer the game's gone on, I feel like all the countries' individual scenes have died off. And in the modern day, to even get recruited, it feels like you have to basically just be a star player and just frag out an FPL or in like some tier 3 qualifier, and the people just notice your stats are crazy. I don't really know what the other pathway there is. Do you have any thoughts yourself, by the way, Alex? Do you have a theory as to why it is?
Yes. From my end, I can say, and thanks for your answer. I think that there are two processes happening at the same time. First process is CSGO becomes similar to League of Legends in terms of the way organizations operate in Europe countries. Basically, it's like my impression. But at the same time, I think that maybe in a couple of years, with such kind of pass, we will have more international teams in Europe than, let's say, more than national teams.
Yes.
And the second point is basically the reason why I'm asking this question is because in 2021, I believe out of 12 tournaments, major ones, 11 were won by CIS teams. Sure. And CIS teams, I mean, for bigger organizations, lesser organizations, have established funnel for newcomers, like Navi Academy team, like Gambit Youngsters, which later became primary team for it. And I think that at some point of time, European organizations will have to establish such funnel for amateurs who want to become pro players. And basically 2021, in my opinion, is a primary example when such funnel helps region to proceed to like better results. And go
on.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, yes, I think that at some point all the major organizations will have to go international. We already think it with Astralis, with
Vitality, you mean? Yes, Vitality.
Yes, sorry, Vitality, and even with Fnatic.
Sure, yeah. No, the thing is, I think you make a good point. I will say, though, in a sense, if we're going to look at regions like that, CIS actually has the biggest advantage of any region because logically, they already have loads of really skilled players. You can be from Ukraine or Belarus or whatever. There's a whole load of places you can be from where you all speak Russian. So you actually do have that. You can still essentially have people from other countries, but you speak the same language naturally, and there's at least a cultural similarity. Whereas I actually think the problem we have in the West goes like this. What are the two countries that in theory speak the best English? North America, basically just USA mainly, USA and UK, and at the moment they're not producing the best Counter-Strike players in general. So I think the main problem for me is European teams in general, nearly all of them have second language English. The problem is they're just not going to be as good if that becomes the first language of the team, as it were. Whereas at least the CIS team, yeah, they can just speak Russian, obviously. And I think the other key thing for me is, I think CIS has another advantage, which is because of the economic state of some of the countries. I can tell you, when I talk to CIS pros, some of them have just straight up told me, like, I'll never retire. As long as they keep paying me the kind of salary you can get at least like tier 2. Like, I mean, put it this way, I can tell you, let me ask you for comparison, right? If you could make, let's just make it reasonable. Let's say you could make $3,000 a month playing CSGO. I'm assuming that'd be a pretty decent living where you're from.
Yeah, it will be more than like 2 times better than.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yep. So basically, I think there's also an extra reason if you're from CIS to want to go pro, which is great. Whereas the problem is, it's why it's actually very weird if you ever look at the history of CS, because for the first 10 years of CS 1.6, it was all just people trying to theorize, why does like Sweden and the Nordic region have all the talented players? And the funny thing is, the reasons they used to come up with don't make any sense at all now. Like they used to actually say things like, oh, because the region is so financially well off, you don't have to work. And it's like, they didn't realize like what used to get paid in salary back then would be like less than a part-time job if you lived in Sweden. So logically, you couldn't even afford housing. So yeah, the good thing about these topics, in my opinion, is there are no right answers. There's no like clear answer. It's more like we're all trying to theorize based on our own experiences what it could be. So does someone else want to jump in on this one? It's a pretty broad topic.
Yeah, back in the day, it was like a different culture as well in Sweden, the people there played it in school and just started playing it up. And They had more local tournaments at the time as well. Like way more tournaments, like in their regions, they just had plenty of tournaments, and you could like literally grow talent in those scenes just from themselves. So it's why you had a lot more like national teams back in the day compared to now.
Yeah, I will say, if people don't know, like, especially in places like Sweden and Denmark, like it was just default. If you were like 13 years old, you definitely played Counter-Strike, at least at some point, if not for years and years and years. Whereas, yeah, I do get a vibe now. First of all, there's way more games you can play. Like, I don't think as many kids come into CS. And then I actually really wonder myself about, like I said, about the local scenes, because back in the day, there used to genuinely be LANs every month or two that even top players could go to if they wanted. Like you could have semi-pro LANs in Sweden. That doesn't even exist as far as I know in Sweden now. Like I would struggle to even tell you if any of those LANs exist anymore.
I know in Belgium, we even had them on school computers just installed. Like when you had break during like lunch and shit, you would just play like a couple of games of Counter-Strike. Like,
I have the following experience. I had basically back in the days in 2003. I was playing in a computer class with my teammates in CS. I think it was beta at that point of time, 0.7.2 or something like this. And I think that basically, LANs like faded away. For a quite long time, at least in Russia, they faded away. I think something like 5 or 6 years ago already. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll actually say, by the way, because there's an area that a lot of people in this conversation probably won't know about, because back in CS 1.6, CIS region was sort of like, it may as well have been another planet to us. Like we didn't know the language, and we had no real connection to the scene. So it's only because teams like Na'Vi, Moscow 5 came up at the end of 1.6 that people like knew they were good players. But I used to actually know everything about the Russian scene. Like I followed it from the beginning, and I can tell you, when I did a load of research at the end of 1.6 to find out every single tournament top players had attended, it would blow people's mind how many LANs there were in the CIS region, like specifically in Russia and Ukraine. I'm not exaggerating. There were LANs almost every single weekend. And if you were someone like Adren, Markelov, Zeus, Blade, unironically, you might have attended 300 LANs just within your region. Like, that's like the amount there were. It was mental. Almost everything was on LAN back then, as far as I can tell. Like, even if you were, like, they would even have a LAN qualifier to the LAN that would be the next week. So, because obviously people know that, like, Cyber Arena in Ukraine, etc., in Kiev, like, it was an incredibly healthy scene back then. I mean, to be fair, obviously people's internet was worse, but yeah, that aspect of a funnel, that's a perfect term, obviously, the talent funnel, it either doesn't exist or it's something different now. Like I say, for me, you become a talent now by either you have to just numbers-wise just catch people's attention on HLTV, or you have to basically be like an FPL whiz kid who just shoots everyone in the head and everyone's like, oh my God. But I don't really know. My problem is this. I don't understand it. Like, I'll give you an example. If you were Crims, but you only started playing 2 years ago, and you're now ready to be good enough, how do you actually get the attention of Fnatic? How do you get NIP's attention? Like, where do you go to play? Is it just FPL? Because the reason I picked Crims is because, to me, Crims is a great example of someone where if you look at the eye test, he's never going to look like he has sick aim, does he? But his whole thing is about, like, how does he work in the team? What's his mentality? Consistency? These are things that won't really show, I think, if you just watched him in a random match. So I actually wonder and worry, how do players like that make it to the top? Does someone else have some thoughts?
Yeah, well, coming from the US side, we never really had like a LAN culture at all. So just based on the historical esports stuff, everyone did stuff through like solo queue. So like face it, essentially. So I guess the idea is
SoCal exist? Like SoCal,
yeah, but that's so
right.
Yeah, here's the thing.
Scene,
they did have a scene, but like you're right, by the way, California was the main place that had the scene and a bit of New York. But the issue is that was mainly in the early years, Jerkies. That was sort of like the first 6 or 7 years of 1.6. Even towards the end, it was falling off. Like, I'll give you an example. The moment I knew that SoCal was in trouble was when they even started banning the pros from playing in those lands, because the problem is motherfuckers who actually were like invite level would just go down and wreck all these kids and win like the $500 and just ruin the tournament.
Yeah, I
for
remember
everyone.
that.
So they sort of had to like ban them all. And then the issue is, maybe this is actually a microcosm of the topic, because to be fair, as LAN culture died out in NA was when we established, because I was actually part of making this a service, the ESEA premium service, which basically was Face It before Face It, right? It was just Pogs instead of like an actual proper gather system where you pick the team and all that crap. But yeah, so I will say that became the way you play in NA, sort of a precursor.
I will say that there was a good LAN scene in NA in the 1.6 days, from being an old man who was around there. I mean, we had the early days of Fragadelphia. We had Nerve and all the LANs that we had in Vancouver, BC. The West Coast had LANs throughout Washington, Oregon, North Cal, SoCal. You obviously had New York City, as you pointed out, and obviously Texas had a massive LAN scene as well. I mean, we had a solid LAN scene. I think one of the reasons why we have seen North American teams, I guess, not develop as well as other countries in Europe, I think, is a big piece of it. Is going overseas, the infrastructure for internet for most of the major countries is much better than we have it in the United States. And in the United States, you typically saw, going back, West, Central, and East teams, and now we see it come together a little bit, but you still have that discrepancy, for example, where in North America, if you're playing on the West Coast, it's almost impossible to play on the East Coast, and that's just because North America did a poor job investing in infrastructure for internet connectivity in comparison to the European countries. So I think that's somewhat relevant as well when you look at the production. I think big thing, though, in North America is our FPL is kind of became more or less a joke, and that's a little bit of a frustration. I think ESEA was doing a really good job with Rank S for quite a while, and the Rank G program that they put forward was absolutely successful, I want to say, because if you look at the majority of Premier and advanced teams and players there, they were participating in Rank G quite a bit. But beyond that, we really have nothing. And the other problem with it is in North America is there is really no one covering lower tier Counter-Strike like you used to have back in 1.6 days. And what I mean by that, if you're not a tier one, someone like yourself, Duncan, is not going to give a shit about, the players coming from who are not the top performers of Extra Salt or Bad News Bears or anything along those lines, right? We have no media scene, and I think that's because in North American esports, we're still a little less mature than you are in other countries, without question. We still don't give as much credit to the media and the reporting on Counter-Strike in North America like it is treated globally. And it's depressing because that's a narrative you need for esports to be successful, in my personal opinion.
The funny thing is this almost loops back into the same topic, because in the same sense as I say that basically, if you boil down what I said initially at the beginning of this convo, it sort of just boils down to the problem is because you don't have a very good talent funnel, and certainly you don't have a wide base to the funnel, you're not getting many people come through. So as a result, if you're a team, you're just going to look around Europe, for example, and if you're a Fnatic, you're going to go, right, I can either get a nobody Swedish AWPer, or I can just say, fuck it, we'll speak English and we'll get Smooya, who's already proven. In the short term, you're just going to pick the latter option, aren't you? You're just going to say, right, forget it, we're just going to go English and we're going to get Smooya for now. The problem is, in the long run, if you actually had the right players, maybe it would be worth trying to get the Swedish player if that somehow really confers a benefit, right? So I would say part of the issue in America for me always was they always used the short-term thinking. Because if you don't know it, in American CS especially, they were also just notorious for cutting people after, one bad LAN or someone has a fight with someone and someone just gets kicked out immediately. Well, the problem is that's like a mindset where you're never going to build anything. You have to basically just get the best pieces today and try and win tomorrow. Whereas I always thought the silliest thing about NACS was all of the teams should have been based around a region. Like, why would I recruit a guy from New York if I live in Texas and we're going to play with bad ping and we can't meet each other except for 2 times a year? Like, I'd probably be better off getting the next best player in Texas, even if he's worse. Like, at least I can meet him. We can do the LAN circuit. We can even meet up for boot camps. Like, there's just so many. All our ping's going to be more reasonable, so we can practice. I think basically, if people had actually committed to sort of making proper regional teams, it would have made a lot more sense. I think actually you could have sort of circumvented some of these issues. Thing is, it's too late now. Like, we're talking about 15 years later, aren't we? Like now,
Yeah.
all the problems is really deeply set in. So I'm not really. And then on the rank S face it
Right.
angle, I also personally thought on that one, that's just an attitude problem, in my opinion. Because as you said, those services existed, but the reason they don't work like the European ones is because, as far as I can tell, didn't most of the pros either not play it, which already fucks the whole system, or even worse, they would play and just play like streamers, as far as I remember right, and just be sort of like memeing and doing stupid shit, like trying to knife each other all the time. Like, in that scenario, if you're a pro and you're not going to take it seriously, how's the guy who needs to practice against you to get good going to show his skills? Like, and so to me, this is just an NA thing. NA is always about having an excuse prepped on deck for if you lose the game. So to me, the reason why those players just dick around in FPL is so that if they do lose to the guy who's like basically, like a Premier level player who's trying to make his way up, they can just go, who gives a fuck? You would never beat me in a real game. I was just sticking around. Ha ha ha. These guys think I'm retarded. Jokes on them. Ha. And then just leave the room. Like, that's basically what the NA pros are doing to them. So I feel like the environment is terrible to grow in. And I'll throw in one last thing, which is it's still the number one problem in NACS, but they'll just never acknowledge it. It's that when you are on the come up and you're a skilled prospect, they can't just shut up and play. They always have to shit talk the like great player who's on his way down. And what you don't realise when you do that is, 1, he's going to hate you. 2, he's a legend. Probably all his friends are the other players you're going to try and get recruited by over the next 2 years. So if you do that, if you talk shit, even though it's justified, it's a competitive game, you're doing better than them, you think, well, I'm better than this guy, I can talk a bit of shit. It's like it's bad politics, though. It'll restrict you being in teams,
Sadly, that is the truth. Like, literally the truth. I've seen so many like streams where like an upcoming player you would hear just in the background shit talking like one of the current pros, and it's like, mate, you haven't even played on that level yet. Shut the fuck up.
At all. And then there's the other angle as well I'll throw in, which is when you make let me think how you'd say this. I forgot my point. What were you gonna go and jump in, Matt? Was it Joshua who was going to talk there?
Yeah, sorry. I just want to. Okay, so I can say that basically I have no like stereotypes against NA, but at the same time, if you have a look at League of Legends scene, if you have a look over CSGO scene, there is no region in the world who failed as much imports as NA in both of these disciplines. Like,
you mean like as in like relative to the amount of players?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'd agree in that regard. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the sad thing is, this is actually one of the really unfortunate things. As bad as like, if people don't know, at the beginning of CS:GO especially, the scene was just drained, and all the reasons we've just given it, it looked like it had no chance to ever actually get to the top. Like, if people remember back in the day, like iBuyPower and Cloud9, which were the two main teams, they were like the equivalent of. Let me think, what team could I compare them to now? They were more like fucking, I'm trying to think of a team that can't win but is good. They were more like Nippies now or something, you know. They were like an all right team with like a bit of a chance for an upset, but they weren't going to win the major or anything, you know. Like they were just like a second tier region, as it were. But if you look, right before we had to go online for all this bullshit, the NA scene was actually in pretty good shape. Like if people remember, you had Team Liquid, legitimately best team in the world a few months before. Then you had EG, were winning tournaments and were like a top 2, top 3, top 5 team, depending on what we're talking about. After that, you still had some, like you had the Gen G lineup. You had plenty of talent and a lot of orgs in the scene. So I will say that as well. The saddest thing about the online period and the whole Flashpoint saga for me is just how many NA orgs that have enormous budgets just pulled out and put all the money into CDL or fucking Fortnite or just wasted more money on Overwatch. I feel like I agree. The NA region, unfortunately, relative to like sort of the opportunities it has underplayed itself the last couple of years heavily.
Also, like what is, let's say, sad for me, just because I love CSGO for like tournaments, like just as it is, not like for. I'm not heavy rooting for CIS or whatever. Is that okay. NA has proven that they can produce good talents like Leash.
Sure.
Like
I wouldn't say that. It's more they don't grow them properly. They don't.
No. He said they have grown good talent.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Bad.
Yes, and they even proved that they can build teams which can win tournaments. And with that fact, it's just sad to see its state right now. Honestly, it's just sad for me. Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like CSGO is necessarily NA's top priority, as we see everyone leaving, and Valorant essentially took over a lot of people. So, I mean, there's just like a push-pull. If like the number one game is CSGO in like Europe, or as opposed to the other MOBAs, I don't think that's true in NA, right?
I also think it's terrible, dude, when you have like, unfortunately, this is like a way wider problem than esports, but just the fact that everyone is such a sort of cynical materialist nowadays, I think actually kills NA. Because if you ask a random kid, they're going to be like, why would I want to be a liege? I want to Jake Paul and have a YouTube and a massive stream. I want to be famous. Ha, look, swag. I've got money. And I was like, I don't think those kids like basically that would be like if there was. This is a mad analogy. I'm trying to make one in sports. Obviously, we don't have anything like streaming really in sports. If somehow the people who play basketball at Rutger Park in New York were like streamers and they got more views than the NBA, then yeah, maybe people wouldn't be trying to be LeBron James. Maybe they'd be trying to be, I don't know, fucking Skip to My Lou, all those guys who do all the playground tricks. Maybe that would be the angle. Because I get the vibe nowadays. It's more about being famous than it is being good at something. So you're going to get a lot of what would have been talent and they're just wasting their time becoming streamers or whatever. Yeah, which doesn't help us in CSGO, does it? And
also it doesn't help that like the top people who went from NA are like our secondary tiers, because like the real good ones in NA still stick to CS.
Sure.
And then the upcoming talents that were like able to probably become tier 1 have also left the Valorant just because the paid fucking check. Like, oh yeah, more eyeballs on this product and I get like 2 times my paycheck. Why the fuck would I stay? Yeah.
Honestly,
go on.
This situation with Valorant reminds me like Overwatch hype at the beginning. Like everyone was jumping this train. Even some CSGO players left for Overwatch, and some even League of Legends players left for in NA for Overwatch. But with like years, it's slowly decreased in terms of numbers and money. And honestly, Valorant reminds me Overwatch in the beginning, let's say, of its hype. Yeah.
All right, let's do a pivot, because we did a good amount of time on this topic. Someone else give me a topic. Let's go another angle on this.
Just tangentially quick to that, do you think like world championship / Olympics / show events are any good? Like Team France versus Team USA versus Team Russia and stuff? In theory,
yeah, but the problem is if you're going to do them, this is why WESG sucks, mate. Because WESG exists in a world where the whole reason we had this discussion is there are so few top national, all national teams. Like the joke is even Navi couldn't play in WESG, could they? Because even though like they all speak the same language, some of them are from Ukraine, some are from Russia. I mean, they're mainly from Russia, but you know what I mean? Like in that scenario, they couldn't all play with all 5. So what you need to do if you're going to do it in the modern day is you need to do it like they actually did like 4 or 5 years ago, well, maybe 6 or 7 now, where you have it like a national team in soccer, where the idea is, yeah, you play for your club in the league, but then whatever country you are, you make a team of all the best players, but it can't be a real team. If you make it a real team, it just ruins it for the countries that have to put together like a makeshift squad. You'd need to make some rule, like, you know, each team can only have 2 players from one team or organization or some rule like that. If you did it like that, and then you gave people, I don't know, a week to practice, I think it could be a fun tournament, but it'd only be fun. It wouldn't be like a really important thing. Like, in my opinion, the only reason the World Cup even has the status it does is because of the history. Like, I actually think that format is almost like a relic of the past. Like, you'll notice there's no other sports trying to go that angle. This is not really the way you do it in the modern day. So I personally don't find it that interesting. Like, what you'll realize when you try to put together the teams to do that, like you know, 5 Polish players, 5 Ukrainian players, you'll realize like you can only get about 6 good teams. And then you start getting teams like, I mean, a good example would be Jerky's Belgium, right? Belgium at one point in time, they could have Existence and Scream. So you're like, oh shit, this might be interesting. And then you go, well, who the fuck are the other 3? And then it just ends up being like tier 3 players, doesn't it? So I think it sounds like a sexy idea, but in practice, it doesn't work out as well, unfortunately. And also, a lot of the other teams and players, remember, this is the other downside. Unless you have a good reason for it, some of them just might not even play. Like, another thing that tended to happen in those Nations Cups over the years is there'd be 1 or 2 where everyone sent the good players, and then eventually some of the real pros would be like, I'm not playing that shit. And so, for example, I remember the most ridiculous one was in 2015. We had one where Team Sweden, remember, Sweden by default should be like always a contender to win. Sweden sent a team that was Pronax, Devil Walk, and fucking Exist in one team. So they had 3 IGLs. They didn't even send Forrest Olofmeister. None of those guys. They just sent some whack-ass. I think like fucking Pauf, or one of the joke players was in the team. Yeah, I think it was ridiculous. So I think the other problem is convincing the top pros to play if there's not much money or they just don't care because they're a top team. That's going to be hard for that format in the modern day. That's more like in 1.6 people did that sort of for pride, as it were, and there wasn't as many tournaments to play back then.
Also, like the sad part is that when those kind of tournaments are held, there are restrictions in place that you can't like have more than X amount of people from the same team in pro onto like the national team as well, to like make it so that it's more balanced.
Yes, this was I was going to talk about. Is it's easy to break such system. I have example from the Dota 2. Back in the days when there was like Golden Virtus Pro team, which were winning like every major, and there was WCG at this point of time, and basically what they did is they got 4 players from Virtus Pro team, which was mentioned like as the strongest team in the world at that point of time, and they replaced their mid laner, no one. With decent mid laner from Russia, his nickname was FN, and they just destroyed everyone on Dota 2 tournament. It's like it was even fair. It's basically you are offering professional team versus mixed teams, like of really good players, but still mixes, and it's just not fair in my opinion. Yeah, and there is such possibility right now again, basically.
Sure. Right, let's do another pivot. What about Matt or Joshua? Do one of you two have a topic you want to bring up?
I don't know if it's necessarily a topic everyone's interested in, but I just want to point out after our last discussion, we were talking about NACS and the move of OC to Liquid, and one of the things that came out in the last couple of days that I'm pretty excited about, we were talking about Rush. Well, Extra Salt's making a play for Junior, and it looks like they're also going to be making a play for Rush and Daps, and I'm assuming Daps is a coach. I'm quite excited about that because I think that they're going to continue to be a good team based around the roster they already have.
What was the reason as to why Daps would be the coach?
I just assumed, I guess I don't actually know that one way or another. I made the assumption. I don't know where they're going to drop another player to replace for Daps. Right now, I don't know who they would drop from their roster, because right now they have their 4. They're going to bring in Junior. They're going to bring in Rush. I'm not sure if they're going to revamp and pull everyone from that squad. So I could be wrong, obviously, but I don't see him dropping floppy. I don't see him dropping.
Let me just check what it said. Let me just see.
This was from Dust.
I don't see them.
So it says here, and in the news report, it just says a new squad headlined by Daps and Rush, and that Junior will be joined as the replacement for Orsi. But then I think it's implying... Oh, it implies that they'll maybe get Grim. And then who would the fifth be if that was the scenario? I'm trying to see if it actually says who the fifth's implied to be.
Fang?
It'd be Fang or Floppy would be my assumption.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. Right. That was just for the future, right? At the moment, they claim here, the lineup at the moment is Daps, Rosh, Swisher, Infinite, Minus. So they're implying Daps players because they have someone else listed as the coach.
Oh, yeah. Lucid. That's true.
Because that's the thing. If people don't know, when Daps actually came back to CSGO, I was told that they actually initially wanted him to come back as the IGL and play. I think he would just straight up replace Stanisov on EG. But I think he didn't want to do that. Like, I assume he knew he'd be terrible if he just came back with no prac or whatever. But I think basically after his period coaching, he's realised this is why, by the way, so many in-game leaders don't become coaches, because you quickly realise you have so little power compared to if you're the in-game leader and you're like a tenured player. So most of them, they already want to play anyway, so I'm not surprised. I would imagine Daps is coming back as the IGL personally, but if I look at this lineup, like, look, if they can get people like Grim's an obvious example, like he could be a star player, etc. If you look at the line they have on paper here, Daps, Rosh, Swisher, Infinite, Minus. Right, well, the Infinite guy, I've actually seen him play a decent amount. I not only saw him in Flashpoint 1, but I saw him a little bit online. He's a pretty good player, actually. It's not even just aim. Like, actually seems like he has fairly decent game sense. Rush, obviously, is a much better player than you saw at the end in complexity. Like, he doesn't even have to be a bitch in the team. Like, he could actually be one of the, like, he could be a star entry, mate. He's got the skills at this level. And then if you could add Grim, I actually think Grim is so much better than he looked in Team Liquid. Like, I think if you build the team around him, I don't know if he'll be as good as he was in Triumph, but I think it'll be a lot better in Team Liquid. So I actually think the sort of the floor for this team looks pretty good. You got a good mix of experience, like some up and coming skilled players, and I actually think the ceiling's probably like slightly underrated depending on where they end up. Like, I could see this being a good team.
If you could insert Grim and you could like let him like be, for instance, Cold Zera, for instance, like in early SK, like that would be, you know, a real banging job. Like if you could run wild and get the support of that team, I think you could run wild with this one.
That's optimistic given the level of performance that Cold Zero was playing at that time frame.
Depending, like early Cold Zero, I mean, like when he got the support of the team, like he was really, really good. Like he was considered one of the best people in the world at that time, right?
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, if you could get Grim to be that kind of guy and you can have him, like the system build around him, as Duncan said, I think like you could legitimately go for a good run with this team.
Like, I actually think the funny thing is people build teams so poorly in all regions of the world, because the joke is this: most teams that end up being underwhelming, that look decent on paper, it goes like this. You got a couple of stars who were stars like 3 years ago, but now they're not as good, which is why they're on this team. And then you make the unknown players be all the support development and structure in the IGL. Like, that's a terrible way to build a team. This way is way better, by the way, to take established pieces. Like, let's be real, Daps, if he hadn't gone to Valorant, he could have been in a top team now. He could be on EG now, maybe.
Absolutely.
Rush, obviously, if his game didn't die and all the shit in Call didn't happen, he could be in a top team now in NA. So to me, they're actually sort of like slightly overqualified players. It's just that like circumstances mean they are now at this level. So if your support structure are the veterans, the people who know the game, at the end of the day, most of the star roles are the ones where you really just shoot people. That's where I want my young and experienced guy. Like, I can bring in a guy who maybe hasn't been to the top then, and I'll trust Daps and Raj to help him, guide him, set the team, as opposed to take an old, washed star who probably doesn't even know how he operated anyway, and just tell him, right, work with these guys. He's not going to... The star isn't going to bring anything to those players. He's just going to play his game, frag out, and then think, this sucks. I hope someone invites me to another team. So I actually think, even though... obviously, you have to reserve judgment for how they'll do. I actually think at least the basis of how this team's built makes more sense. Like, that's a kick I've been on recently. I'm just kind of sick of people recruiting star players who are young and up and coming and basically just giving them roles that aren't for star players. Like, what's the point in that situation? Like, if I recruit someone in the NBA, first pick in the draft, it's to play the fucking role that he's really good at. I'm not going to go, right, you're a bench player, you just back up a totally different role. Like, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? Why would I waste the number one pick in that scenario?
Isn't that what they did with Grimm? They put him in a support role last time? Like,
essentially, yeah. I also will say, though, I think where he fucked up is it reminds me of what happened to JKS, mate. Because in his old team, people like JKS and Grimm don't even have to ask for the resources. They just get them because they're the best player. When you go to the big team and then it's not working out for you, are you really going to have the balls to stand up in a meeting and go, oh, Lige, actually, I think I should play in that spot at this point in time? Oh, yeah, that's really my favourite CT spot on Nuke, mate. Can I get that? Like, you're just never going to get it, you know, especially in his team. Like, the joke of his team was when they had Fallen and Stewie, he had zero fellow fucking rookies. Like, he's just looking around at all, like, super established players who were all like, well, I got my spot, bro. What's the problem? And so you're out of luck at that point in time, you know.
This one was the point which I called, like, rolling the dice. Tactic while building the team. It's basically, it's also funny for me just because I just have a feeling that quite often teams starting like their team set up with, okay, we need like some star player and we need Oper, not like a rifle player. We need only young star player Oper. Like, let's give him a chance. Like, I don't know, maybe even Lucky in Astralis. And then after this, like, let's build up a structure around him. But basically, you, with such kind of tactic, you're trying to get immediate result of a guy who hasn't played on lands against such players as Zaiwu, Simple, and even like mid-tier, let's say, players. And basically, you're expecting good results from rolling the dice. Like, maybe this will like happen, maybe it won't. And it's basically it's such, I don't know, I wouldn't call it amateur, but in my opinion, first you need to build is some kind of, let's say, skeleton of the team, and only after this you can build muscles. But sometimes people just trying to go for raw firepower. And like starting from Oper, and we have even proven results on the scene when star Oper is not like required. It's G2 basically. They don't have star Oper, but the results are incredible in 2021. So in my opinion, it's like it's a little bit, I don't know.
No, I think you make a good point. Like, I'll give you a contrast. If I showed you on paper the names in G2, the one you're talking about, obviously before these new moves they're going to make now, if I showed you that 5-man lineup on paper, and then I showed you the lineup of Team Spirit on paper, you'd think Team Spirit should win easily. Look, they've got way more skilled players. Look at all these fucking fraggers and Orpers and everything. But the joke is, Team Spirit really is a team that's like a superstar Orper and Dexter, and then a bunch of like somewhat skilled players around him, but like the roles are really messy, the structure's terrible, they don't seem to have tactical CS. Meanwhile, in G2, they only have one superstar player, they have one really good player, and then they have sort of like Nexus in the middle, and then the rest are like, most people think not that good players, but they fit the roles pretty well. Basically, minus an Orper, and the IGL's a bit iffy. Everything else is nailed. Like, they've got the aggressive elements, they've got the support elements, they've got the entry player. Like, the difference is the team structure carries that squad, and obviously having Nico doesn't fucking hurt, does it? I'd say that's a better way to build a team.
You could also become a revolving door. Like, if some player doesn't fit, you keep kicking the same role over and over and over again. You would essentially become NIP after they kicked, like, you know.
One of the prime samples when, like, yeah, sorry, continue.
No, keep going, man.
One of the prime samples when support players are really important, not like support, even experienced players, is RPK situation. Team Vitality like was way more dangerous in 2020, in the late 2020. Compared to the way this team played in, let's say, middle 2021 or something like this. And I don't believe that RPK wasn't a part of this.
Mate, RPK there's a perfect example.
Insane amounts of experience to bring to the table. There's a reason they brought him back, like, in 2014, 15?
Yeah, beginning of 15. Yeah, basically, that's a perfect analogy even, because think about it, right? If I showed you an RPK demo, mate, his aim's going to look absolute garbage. It's just like an average player. You actually wouldn't even know if he was a pro, maybe. If I show you fucking a Kyojin highlight, you'd be like, this guy's so skilled, oh my God. But you put him in a pro match on LAN like you're talking about. Give me RPK any day of the fucking week, mate. Here's the difference. He doesn't even have to frag. He knows how to play the game. And crucially, he's doing things to help other people. Someone like Kyojin can't even do that. Like he's trying to get his own fucking game together. Never mind help some other guy. He's still figuring it all out himself.
Also, I can say that
Mr. Reliable.
Yes, and basically, in my opinion, a team which wants to be contender, it should not only have firepower and some kind of joker, but it should have character. And youngsters cannot, I mean, very rarely can offer character under the pressure. You can see it in like Gambit results during the major. And there are many samples of such things. And basically, even in Gambit, the only player who was performing at the major was Hobbit. But everyone was talking about Exile. Everyone was talking about Sheer and Afani during the online era. But under the pressure, in my opinion, all of them are crumbled. And in my opinion, this is why I'm saying about Skeleton. It's just because you need to have such, like, let's say, brutal character in the team who will not crumble under the pressure. And this is why I'm talking that it's not correct to build up a team starting from some kind of powerful youngster who has the talent. He will not be able just to offer anything under the pressure. And there won't be anybody to help him to show this talent, in my opinion.
The problem you're going to face, unfortunately, is... like, we're all discussing it, you'll notice, basically using, like, the way I model the game, like the way you set up a team and, like, you've got to balance the team out in terms of what resources people get, what role they have, how they fit together. As you're saying, have, like, a theme, a style, a charm to you where it's coherent, like the idea makes sense, we're all on the same page. You'll notice most pro players don't even think about the game that way, mate. They genuinely, a lot of them believe any good player can play any role, which is the most nonsense idea of all time. And as a result, all they do when they recruit is just recruit the best player they can get. So as a result, you make teams where it's like, you know, 4 people who should be the star player of a team and then 2 people just get fucked over and have sort of like not a very good role. So like, if people look at those lineups, like the lineup they're going to make in EG now is perfect. I don't understand at all what that team is supposed to be on paper. That team just looks like all the people who must have blamed their teammates in Team Liquid and EG going, well, I'm good, but it's the others that are letting us down. What if we joined forces? Well, then nobody would let us down. It's like, you fucking idiot. That's not how it works. Like, there's a structure to the game. Like you're saying here, like in that EG team, who the fuck's the support players there? How's the IGL going to work? What system are you going to play around? Where are the resources going to go? Like, one of the things people don't understand, by the way, is one of the worst things about having 4 or 5 skilled players is there's no logical, natural way to set up the team. Now you actually might have to have an argument over who plays where and what. Whereas the obvious example is, if I had Ziwu in my team in Vitality, there's not even a discussion. It goes without saying he's going to get everything he needs because he's far and away the best player. So I even think it streamlines your team when you recruit properly. I think there's very few teams in history in any sport I've ever followed that had anywhere close to the best players that were the best team. Usually it's more like this. It's more like their style was the best at the time, and then you just need players, here's the key word, that are good enough to do that style. They're not the best player that does it, just good enough to make the style work. I think, if anything, didn't Vitality at the end of this year just prove that? They had a garbage roster on paper, but mate, after the major, that style of player they just discovered it entirely. Like, they had it nailed.
Could be dead roster, like no pressure anymore, but
this is basically why I'm impressed by Vitality during the late months of the year. It's just
it's also because they knew like there was going to be changes after like the new year.
But at the same time, you can't say that they are underperformed. Like,
no. You can't.
And you can't have last ride for 2 months. They even like won IM, I believe. So, in my opinion, it's really impressive for me. It's basically, for me, it's a sign that they're like professionals who want to do their stuff and want to do it good. Just because if you compare it to Team Liquid, which was playing like the same tournaments, and if you just have a look of the like how they did perform and how they did even interact on cameras and with each other, you'll see that basically people were not like a team, and you can't say the same about Vitality, in my opinion.
Some teams, when they reach near the end of their lifespan, just like either they go the route of no pressure anymore and they start overperforming, or they just completely break down in themselves and go, fuck it, why the fuck should I play anymore? Now, you would consider the fact that, well, if you play better near the end of your other term, you might get picked up again by different teams.
That's why I personally think it's crazy that in all the roster discussions, nobody ever brings up the topic of, like, should Team Liquid replace Adren as their coach? This guy oversaw this entire worst period ever for the team. When on paper, here's the difference. On paper, Vitality's roster should never even be in a semi-final. On paper, Team Liquid should be in fucking every semi-final and quarter-final. Like, look how good that lineup, like, in terms of, like, the names on paper, they had a mega-looking lineup. But in the server, they were basically always underwhelming. They would have the odd game that looked good, and then they'd just go right back to just being an average-as-fuck team, you know? So to me, that makes me look at a coach and go, what are you doing here, mate? Like, are you actually working with these players? Have you even got a structure set up? Meanwhile, in Vitality, you look at the players on paper and Extaz has to be doing something. Their coach has to be doing a good job. There's almost no way he couldn't be.
Basically, this is one of the points which also frustrating me is basically everyone says like, for example, Blade, great coach, like good tactics and so on. But nobody thinks that out of current 5-man lineup from Navi, 4 players were brought to top tier scene by Blade. It was simple. It was electronic. It was Perfecto, who was picked up from Simon Gaming. Nobody heard about Simon Gaming on top tier. I truly believe it. And it was Beat from Navi Academy team. And basically, what is basically the showing is that coach is responsible for not only for building up lineup, but making it perform. And the point that Blade was able to make this lineup perform on the highest level is ridiculous for me. And this is like primary example when your coach basically can bring your structure to some kind of success, or if you're talking about Adren, maybe do nothing and let him to crumble or like whatever. And people just used to like overestimate roles of coaches as tacticians, but nobody like trying to talk about coaches as some kind of not scouts, but maybe a guy who builds lineup. And this is what also for me is one of the main difference between esports and big sports.
Sure. It's one of the reasons I was actually, even though I get it because of the Zonic move, it's one of the reasons why to me it's still just shocking that they kicked Extaz out. He also looked like he did a good job generally as a talent scout. Because if you notice, the old version of being a coach really is just a guy to just watch the demos for you and be like the friend of the IGL almost. The modern version of the coach is, like you say, essentially he's like the CEO of the company. It's his job to run everything and hire the people and make sure it works properly. And if the people under him don't do a good job, you probably have to fire him eventually. So to me, the best coaches are the ones who are playing some of this role. Whereas you can tell the people who are trying to coach like we did 3 or 4 years ago, like, the problem I think someone like a Dren has is I don't think he's thinking of any of this at all. I think he thinks, right, my job is the coach, and they already know how to play the game. I just, watch the games. I practice with them. I tell them a few things before the game. I do a timeout to keep them on track of what they're doing, and then win or lose, that's up to the players, isn't it? So even though I agree in principle it is, the problem is, as you say, when people like Blade and Extaz go way above and beyond and have an enormous impact, it makes the other coaches look like they're not doing anything. Do other people want to jump in?
Sorry.
Yeah, if we're going back on the team building aspect, I just had a curiosity point of like, is it even possible to train as a support player? So if, let's say, I was to learn CS, could I learn to be a support player and then get picked up as a team? Or is that just like, you just have to have aim and you get picked up through FPL?
The problem is, you could learn to do it, like, as in obviously you physically can. Like, it would even be a good approach. Just as you allude to, the problem you're going to have is, we also have to change the way we recruit players. Like, I personally think it's stupid as fuck. Like, the whole reason the Grim situation happened is because what they really do is they go, right, we need a new player. Who's the best player available? And then they just recruit him. But that doesn't always make sense. Like, in that scenario, I would rather go, what does the team need? And then go and look if there's a player who can fill that need, even if he's not as skilled as, say, Grim in this case. Like, maybe there was a guy out there, maybe it was even someone like a Rosh who actually would have fit the squad better, even if he wasn't as skilled a player. So I think, personally, that is the better way to recruit. It's actually something I was talking about recently in a video. Is like, should you basically recruit the best player you can and try and mould him, or should you just recruit for what you think you need? And as far as I can tell, I think in CS it's more the latter. It's one of the reasons why, if you notice, if I ever get asked to make a team, like if someone says make a team out of, like free agents, I'll nearly always pick someone that others are like, well, why are you picking him? Like, I'll give you an example. I would probably pick like AZ if I'm making a team with MSL. Everyone else would be like, why are you picking him? Because I know he can do his job. I know the in-game leader knows how to use him. He's played the roles I'm going to use him for a long time. He's a veteran and he's a half-decent player. Like, I don't need him to be a fragger. Like, that's what my other roles are going to be for. So I think other people, unfortunately, it's like I say, they're not viewing it as a sport. They're not playing Football Manager. They're still thinking it's just a game where you just put a bunch of good players in and they sort of just figure it out in the moment or something.
I think that basically to become a good sport player, you have to have really great experience within the game, and maybe even on top tier. Just because, in my opinion, support role is one of the hardest to learn. You have to do a lot of, let's say, things which are not connected to fragging, but which connected to secondary stuff, like helping your teammates, holding different angles which are not easy, and so on. And you have to have great experience to do it efficiently, just because it's basically you have to control yourself better, and at the same time you have to read the map better, and it's not easy to do. And if you're a young player with like good aim, it's easier for you to go like superstar pass than support pass, just because you have fragging power. And if you have like ability to read the map, then you can make the moves. So this is why we don't have a lot of young support players, in my opinion.
I also think it's just depending on the fact, like how you think about the game. Everybody has a different philosophy on how to play the game, and people have different upbringings, like when they grow up, obviously, and also affects how you play the game, I think.
Sure. Do we have another pivot, another topic? Someone want to jump in with one here? What about you, Zen? Have you got one, mate?
Yeah, it's just closely, since we talked Vitality, are you excited about this change? Do you think they have a chance of challenging Navi? And if not them, is there any of the other many rumored rosters that you think has a good chance?
The only downside here is Zen has just given away that he hasn't been listening to any of the shows for the last 2 weeks, because these two topics are probably the most discussed topics on all the podcasts I've been doing. So I'll give you a quick summary. Yeah, I'm pretty excited for the Vitality move. I actually think it's a great move. I think it's got a lot of potential to be really, really good. I actually, even personally, I'm not as down on some of the Astralis players that are going there as some of the others. I think those are the players I had my bets on to get back to the top level. I think the ones that stayed in Astralis were the ones I expected to potentially sort of decay and become a bit washed. So I think Vitality has massive chances. Obviously, it's a crapshoot in terms of mashing together the two nationalities. I don't know how that'll work out yet. But my logic goes, it's kind of like when Cloud9 made their team. As long as you're willing to spend money still, even if one of these players doesn't work, you can replace him and the pieces there could still be number one. So that's an interesting team. For me, the other teams, I think there's actually quite a lot of squads can compete. Like, if you really do put ROPS on FaZe, look, they won't be a world beater, but I think they can be like a team in semi-finals and finals, maybe. There's a chance for that. There's one team. Heroic still in the mix. I know they've had a few problems recently, but I expect them to get better online as they get more experience. Gambit's only going to get better the more experience they get. And then the last one for me is Virtus Pro. I actually think Virtus Pro's lineup already is amazing. I can't wait for the next tournament they play. And then that's without even talking about G2, because at the moment we don't technically know if the moves are happening or not, because there's all that up in the air bullshit, which might just be like theatre, or it might be trying to negotiate and play mind games with each other. So if G2 actually does make the move of getting Monacy and Alexi B, which is the rumour people had, certainly would be an interesting move. So I think for me, the cynicism that like, oh, Navi's unbeatable and no one will ever stop them, like, that was just it last year. This year, I actually think Navi's going to have the proper challenge. They're going to actually have a lot of competition, in my opinion. I would still pick them to be number one, but I think there's 3, 4, maybe even 5 teams that can go head-to-head with them. What do you guys think?
I think that basically, in order to beat Navi, you can take either of 2 paths. And the first path is to try to build up traditional team, like with trying to build up synergy between players, like trying to scout them slowly but surely. Basically, this is what Gambit did with Gambit youngsters. And the second path is you have to gamble. Otherwise, you won't have a chance. And you have to gamble and hope that it will work. And basically, this is what Vitality is doing, and as far as I get, G2 is doing right now, and maybe even Astralis. Just because if you want to like beat a machine, you have to build up either other machine or like something ridiculous. You can't. It will take a lot of time to build up. In a traditional manner, a team which can contend with such Navi team, in my opinion.
For me, we have seen more and more teams leave Counter-Strike behind. So if that happens, more and more players will be freed up, and then you will have a bigger possibility of creating more teams like FaZe. But the question is, who would invest in them? Like maybe the players themselves will create one. But I think we will see the rise of a new powerful team coming up that might contend with Navi over this year.
The other thing is worrying me is basically you not only need, let's say, a team of really good players, but what about IGLs? And in my opinion, like IGLs is a problem not only for NA but also for Europe. And even Apex, who had become quite decent, maybe even like good at this point of time, IGL, he was entry fragger in the past, and we don't hear about such guys as MSL, for example. I haven't seen Stanislaw on top tier competition for a really long time, and this is what worrying me is if you build up international team, you need IGL, which will have let's say some reputation, and the only IGLs I can say for now, like it's basically you can count them with fingers of your one hand. It's Kerrigan, it's Glaive, maybe it's Apex, and I don't know who else.
Yeah,
so this
for
is a
sure.
problem.
That is indeed a big problem. So maybe one of those teams will implode, and maybe one of those people will be picked up. You know, you can't really say in Counter-Strike currently because it's a volatile time zone that we're living in. Because of like the orgs pulling out and then moving to Valorant, maybe some of these players will move to Valorant themselves. Who the hell knows at this point in time? Like,
I think though, if you had a really good IGL, it would be the most obvious way to actually have a chance against Na'Vi. It's the reason why I hope Rops does go to FaZe, so Kerrigan has someone. Sadly, it doesn't look like Glaive's going to have the pieces to do it, so take the one off the table. As you said, when you go beyond that, you're looking at names like MSL, isn't in a team at the moment. Stanislaw doesn't seem to have a team at the moment. Nitro's coming back, but who the fuck knows what form he's going to be in. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. There aren't many names, I'll agree. I think that's one of the problems, because to me, the weakest position in Na'Vi is the end-game leader, so I would love to see the really, really great in-game leaders have the pieces to go head-to-head. That's why I think, personally, the Vitality move's even more exciting, because even though the assumption is Apex stays as the IGL, I personally think if it doesn't work out, they just pivot to Magisk. He did a great job in Astralis, so there's another angle you can potentially go. I certainly do think that's one of the areas of the online era has been a bit whack, in my opinion, is you had too many new people come up. And if you knew, the odds that you're really good in-game leader are just very low. Like, I do think Nafani is a pretty good in-game leader. I think he's done a very good job. Even on LAN, I thought his calls were pretty good. Looked like he had a good read. It's just his teammates were worse. So I don't think it worked the same way it did online. So again, with them, I don't worry about the Gambit lineup. I think it's just time. So give him 3 months, give him 4 months. I think he can be where he needs to be.
Yes, and the reason why I'm not putting Nafani in the list is just because, in my opinion, every great IGL has to prove himself with wins, with tournaments, and it's also a psychological thing. You need to have like this taste of winning, and until you have it on LAN, you cannot be a true predator, you know, something like this. And but I really believe that Nafani has all the potential to do it, in my opinion. It's all some kind of stage of starting to be a mature IGL, in my opinion.
Joshua, who do you think is the team or these teams is the one that you're looking at to potentially either beat Navi or actually maybe even supersede them? Is there someone that you'd pick out of this mix or someone on the team maybe?
I have two teams, and please not call me CIS fanboy, but I think that Gambit and Virtus Pro have the most solid chances. Just because both of them, in my opinion, have better IGLs than Navi, just based on my opinion, even though like Pugnatio called in some crucial rounds during like epic comebacks on nukes, for example. But it's also a reason why I'm saying this is just I don't believe in gambling in terms of like making big changes. I believe in more traditional way to build up a team. It's a really long path, but at the same time, if you do it correctly, you have way more solid team with way more established interactions, with way more established like personalities in it. And as a second point is basically I also believe in coaches. I think that Gambit have like really great coach Groovy. I believe he was player back in the days in 1.6. And also there is Entropic, which has such calls as Hooch. And I also believe Virtus Pro have like really good coach. And this basically the reason why I believe in those teams, just because they have established structure. And it's way more easier for them to build up something on it than to build up on something like shaky.
What about some of the people who haven't given their thoughts to this topic? Joshua or Matt, do you have any thoughts, Matt?
I'd like to see the G2 project work out if it does, but I just think the Navi era can go for a while and just more time for teams to play against them. Someone will come up, right?
Alexander did bring up one good point, and that is like that Virtus Pro and like Gambit have more like qualities to beat them. It's also because of the potential regional aspect, I believe, that this will be true.
It's always wild card in RMR. It's such a like bloody battles during RMR tournaments right here. And last point I would like to make: if we like compare all the like Europe teams who has like the chances to build up Navi, honestly, I believe in Zonic, and maybe in a team which will sign up XTS, just because I believe that like if you start with a strong coach who will build up the structure, then I have a chance, in my opinion.
Wasn't the rumor that XTAS goes to G2? Was that the recent rumor?
I believe there was a rumor of that, yes.
Because I'm pretty sure there was a team he was like linked with or something. Let me have a look. I'll try searching for it.
Funny thing is, basically, great coaches are such underestimated things. It's even harder to find a good coach like Zonic, like XTS, than to find decent IGL, like, or good IGL. You have more IGLs, like good IGLs you can call on decent level than coaches. And nobody's hyped. Like, I don't see anybody's like trying to scout coaches or something like this. And this, which is kind of ridiculous for me as well, from my point of view.
I mean, sadly, a lot of people who've listened to this show will already know I tried probably half of my time when I was in Flashpoint was trying to explain to teams that you need a general manager and a coach set up and you need to recruit players through that system and you need to actually do it in a professional way. And most of them don't get it, unfortunately.
And by the way, you have also examples in other regions where like great coach could help a team to become, let's say, a solid contender. For example, China and Dota 2. There is such coach, for example, as Shao8, ROTK, and it's known that basically such coaches have really big, let's say, not like personalities, but they were, let's say, as a father, as a team, as the fathers of the team. And you have in the League of Legends such example as Koma, who also build up different teams who were able to contend or even win at Worlds. And basically, this is like why it's sad for me is you have different samples in different disciplines when great coach can bring you the result you want. But at the same time, they're so underestimated, in my opinion.
All right.
Sadly, that the opposite can also be true, where people overrate them for how impactful they are.
What about? I mean, the problem with coaches is it's all speculation, and like we can never really
exactly
know 100%
like
what
we
they're
can
doing.
speculate, but we will never know unless we were in that team, right?
That's why my favourite ones. I don't think anything will ever beat people telling me about certain coaches and players in game leagues. Well, I've actually been in the scrims and heard the comms, or I've heard the comms in a tournament, and they haven't. So it's one of those things that fans do, innit? Someone else have another topic?
I do. I got a question for you. Looking at the timeline of Astralis picking up Lucky and Smooya going to Fnatic, there was a 2-month window there when Smooya was playing for, I believe it was Movie Star Riders, and could have been a potential op pickup for Astralis. I'm curious what your thoughts on that, if it was just his reputation or what, because, Glaive went on record saying that, in order for Astralis to bounce back, they need to pick up an op, or they picked up Lucky, and they're not putting the op on Lucky at all. Blamaf said, in the Blast finals that it was just Lucky doesn't want to op. He's comfortable with a rifle. To me, this doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of counterproductive to what Glaive did. So I'm just thinking of oppers available at the time. Why was Smooya not a consideration? Is it because of his past issues? It seems to be that for the most part, consensus is that he's really kind of made a 180. And then my second piece to that is, do you believe it has anything to do with the additions of agents representing these players? Is it possibly something along those lines that may be making some of these decisions look the way they are?
No, I would say it's different transfers that were blocked by agents. And there have definitely been some where agents absolutely fucked the deals up, or did mad shady stuff, or asked for loads of money because they were going to get their cut. That certainly does happen in the modern day. But in that particular case, I would assume it's just as simple as they're not going to recruit anyone who isn't Danish. They won't have a Danish team.
That looks to be the case.
But that isn't an excuse in itself, because Acor, Farleague, there's still players that exist you could recruit, but here's the real problem. And until someone can answer this question, how can any of us actually give Astralis any credit? Has it ever been explained to us who in Astralis said Lockie was the guy to recruit?
Nope.
I've never heard it said by anyone. If someone told me, Zodic picked him, he had a choice out of Farleague, to me it just looks genuinely like the org themselves just picked this guy, I'd assume for very little money, and then just told the players he plays in the team now. Because if people don't understand, this is a key point to understand. So most of you will be able to comprehend that obviously Dupree and Magus weren't playing at the end of this year, but they also weren't playing for Vitality. That's because they were still under contract. So basically, Astralis had to get lucky so that then when they negotiate with the others, Astralis, the org, has some leverage, as in, if you don't like our deal, you can walk. That's a way to potentially make the person come more towards your side in the deal. And if you leave, I'm not just a guy with 4 players now. I've got a guy. Look, I've got Lucky. In fact, you know what? If 3 of you leave, I've even got another guy. I've got a guy called Bobski I can bring in the team. As far as I can tell, all the Astralis pickups that don't make much sense were just for this reason. It's so that you will always have 5 players, and you can always pretend to a fan at the Nexus who doesn't know about CSGO that you have the Astralis team. So I don't believe they actually ever thought this was like a super duper player. As I've said before, there was no hype around this player. Nobody ever even heard of this guy before he played in fucking Astralis. So unfortunately, I think Astralis is probably the worst example, because I don't think they actually signed him in good faith.
But Duncan,
it was just PR.
Astralis always wanted that 10-man team. What are you talking about?
Except the irony is, the actual player on the bench is better than some of the starters, and he doesn't actually get to play. So they're actually a team that expressly doesn't use a 6-man rotation, unfortunately.
I think it's a part of the problem of the period when in Astralis everyone had something like months off. All of them wanted vacations or something like this, and in the end it's ended up in such a situation when you kind of have a team, but at the same time you don't know what to do, just because you have a lot of pieces, but you don't know how to puzzle them together. And Lucky is just another example as Babsky, in my opinion, for it.
I'm just going to double check if Lucky actually even was signed or if he was a free transfer. Let me have a look. Let me see here. I'm just looking at the news. Right, he actually, but here's what's mad. Lucky was actually apparently a transfer from Tricked, which I'm assuming implies that he cost money. So all I'll say is this: the only players Astralis has signed in the last few years are Lucky, Esatag, and fucking Bobski. what that shows you is they do not want to spend money. They don't sign really big Danish players. Like, you might go, oh, but wait, think, Ton, what about Config? Like, yeah, their contracts are run out. That guy was free. Just came for free. So the problem is, if Astralis was the org they pretend to be, they would just go and sign a player that's Danish player plays with someone else. Like, maybe they themselves would sign Stown, or they would go and get fucking whoever you want. They would go and get some Valde or whatever. But you notice they aren't. So to me, I think the other problem with Astralis is I also think they want to spend as little as possible. I think they just got lucky that, for whatever reason, Config's just done with fucking complexity. That one move alone, look, Blame F could even have gone. It wouldn't have mattered. It's Config going there that actually gave them like a mild chance to maybe be good. So we'll see how that pans out. I think their AWPA situation is fucked though. Someone else want to jump in?
Sorry.
No, go on.
I also don't think that Astralis has like priority of other Danish teams right now. They were undisputed top tier team back in the days in Danish in 2018, 2019, something like this. But now you have Heroic, which has like way more better results, and you basically can't even also put some kind of reputation once you're trying to hire a guy. Yes, you have like Glaive, but you don't have Zonic. You have Zipnix, but he's like past his prime until he shows up again. And I just don't think that if you're some kind of upcoming star, you want to join Astralis anymore. Giving like also situation as a reputation with Babsky, with Istek, with Lucky.
I've got some bad news for you, mate. Sadly, that's not the case. Every young player from Denmark would join Astralis in a fucking heartbeat.
Yeah,
I even think if it wasn't for this drama with the cheating, I even think heroic players would join. It's just that, like, at the moment, the heroic org doesn't need to sell because they sold out to some way bigger people. And then also they've got this whole, like, sort of beef between the teams. Like, the only players I heard that were saying no were the players that are actually good. It was the Valdes, the fucking Acors, the Blame Fs, the Configs. That this is once upon a time they were saying no. So the downside is I do think maybe some players wouldn't go there, but you have to realise, even players who've heard the shit on By the Numbers, they don't remember that stuff, mate. Like, half of them are morons. If you go out there and look now, half the Danish players act like Astralis is a great org and that they're doing great things in Denmark. Like, even the ones not in Astralis, it's so crazy to me. It just shows the power that you have if you actually sort of get culturally embedded in a space. You don't even actually have to be what you pretend to be. You're just sold. Because people have to understand, in Denmark, yeah, you and me know that Heroic's better. But the average fan in Denmark doesn't. They just think like Heroic's having a lucky period and Astralis is going to get back there in 3 months or something, you know. So, unfortunately, I think that's more like a difference between the hardcore and the casual. And in a sense, the players are more on the casual side, believe it or not.
The casuals believe it, but the stock market sure doesn't.
Like, here's the problem. I agree with you. The Bobsky case alone should be case closed. Like, if I'm a young player, I should see Bobsky and go, well, I'm not fucking joining that team. They might bench me. They might replace me with a random guy. But you have to realise, the way pro players think is they are all arrogant as fuck, by the way. Like, their logic would go,
I'll never be benched.
Yeah, I'll never.
Good to be.
I'm just better than him, mate. So why would they bench me? I'll just be in the team the whole time. That's why they all sign these contracts that have like a contract clause that can fuck them up the arse, because they go, well, I'm never getting sold, am I? I'm mega. It's like, so you have to remember these are like 18-year-old kids, so they're not really the ideal person to be able to see into the future and make reasonable life decisions. You know, they tend to just live in the moment, don't they?
Too much ego is involved as well. Like, they can't put aside the ego and look with like bright eyes to it and go, this Bubsky guy is actually good and sitting on the bench for this long. There might be something fucked up with this team. Nah, just let me sign this contract without even looking at it. Like,
this is basically one of the points which I did not understand for quite a while, is that basically out of 3 players, Istek, Babsky, Lucky, some of them could become really solid, like not star players, but really solid players in other teams. And with like proper coaching, maybe with proper teammates, they could progress way more better, like than being benched, for example. But it's just ridiculous that basically people don't see that for last 1.5 years, Astralis is kinda ruined careers of 3 different pro players, and I don't believe that such like things as benching or failing on the stage didn't have any kind of consequences in terms of psychology or maybe other stuff. And maybe it's just like more mature point of view, but you have to acknowledge that basically none of the changes which were made by Astralis management worked for last, let's say, year at least.
Sure. Let someone else have a topic. Do another pivot.
On your reflections or talk to Thorin with Roy, I think he talked about Acor being like a very non-aggressive opper, or like he wouldn't take plays. Do you think that like puts Acor like out of T1 forever? Or is he like possible to come back?
Isn't that what the Vice was previously? Like the Vice was a pretty hold back op, like in the first place as well, right? Like makes sense that Acor would be a placeholder for him. So
like Acor's prime came when he played with Hundon and Asilian. He wouldn't look as good with Huxley, and then he looked his absolute worst with Dexter, I would say. So to me, the pattern is I'm looking for a good tactical in-game leader. If I get the right one who knows how to use the AWPer, he can bring it out of him potentially. So I actually think personally, this is where I'm totally different to other people. I don't go off like individual form now or think like, oh, well, if he's bad now, he can never be good. I try to look at a more macro perspective, like a longer term view. So in my opinion, Acor now is actually the steal. Now he's the guy where you buy the dip. If you buy Acor now, I bet he's cheap as fuck. Like he's not that great a player left. What have that big a buyout anyway? Most other teams don't care. But if you were someone like Carrigan, Glaive, MSL, the first thing you would do if you signed that guy is sit down, watch all his demos when he was good, when he's not had his problems, and you'd figure all this shit out. You'd come to him and you'd say, right, look, in these scenarios, you're not being aggressive enough. Like, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to micro you at this point, right? You're going to attack the corner now with him and you're going to go as a unit or something. Like, you'd find a way to do it. And then in my opinion, because you'd get him for relatively cheap and there's no competition, if you then do unleash the skills, because he has mad skills, I think you just look like some stock market genius who bought something for pennies and suddenly it's worth tons, you know? That'll be my move anyway.
There is such movie with Brad Pitt called Moneyball about a guy, a manager, who instead of trying to sign up overestimated and really like expensive players, managed to build up a team of like nobodies, no names, and it's like based on some real things which were happening in the
Oakland Athletics
baseball.
and MLB. Yep.
Yeah. And it's kind of reminds me of what's going on right now a little bit. Just because you have a lot of different pieces right now, but you want to go for like the most known names. Like not known names, hot names, I'd say. And so this is why a lot of players like Acor, for example, is out of the line. Just because people don't want to try to build up out of, let's say, middle tier players. Everyone wants to succeed immediately. Yeah.
Here's the example, right? If I asked a random fan, who would you rather have, Acor or Nikodos, the guy from Copenhagen Flames? Their logic would be, well, of course, Nikodos. Look at how he did at the major. So what they're telling me is, for the next 3 months, give me the guy who had a good period in the last 3 months. Well, my question is, will he be good in 3 months? Will he be as good in 3? We have no idea. Whereas in that scenario, I'm recruiting Acor. It's like I've seen enough periods where he was good or looked like he had potential that he could be a way better player in 3 months from now. Like, I think the flaw people are making is they're trying to recruit people from the past. You're trying to recruit for the future. It's one of the reasons why I personally think that Astralis lineup's whack. Because some of those names you've signed, it's like, oh, I've signed him because he was the greatest support ever. Is he now? Nah, he's terrible now. Well, how's that a fucking good move then? You can't go back in a time machine with him and win. You have to play the tournaments in 2022. Doesn't matter if he was fucking good in 2018 or 2019, does it? Like I think some teams have just completely lost the plot on that one. And yeah, there's weight. But it ain't just fucking. It isn't just teams that do this. It's one of the reasons I will always be a very unique analyst when I'm on the desk. You'll notice I don't go with like current form. Like, for example, there's a good reason. Even though Gambit actually looked underwhelming the entire major, there's a good reason I stuck with them until the very end. Because actually there were enough reasons that meant it was possible they could have done better than they did. So I'm not going to let the fact that they played bad in like the fucking Swiss system mean that I have to pick against them in all the playoff games. No, if they have the pieces to be good, I have to consider that as a possibility, even if they haven't shown it yet.
And also that's during your like camera times on different tournaments that people basically looking for maybe last 3 months, maybe last month, or even current tournament during like this like interviews or something like this. But at the same time, people don't look over the year perspective, and this is why, for me, for example, heroic team was better than Vitality, and if anybody like tried to ask me who will have bigger chances, I would say heroic than Vitality against Navi, for example. Just because if you have like the sample over last 6 months, 9 months, you'll have way more clear picture. Just because every pro has ups and downs, and you can't say that right now current form is like not the peak form of last year, and you can't say that it will be peak form next tournament. He'll have the peak form next tournament. But if you have a picture where you see how the guy is performing during the year, you will see that his downs are not like that big, for example. Yeah, I totally agree.
Someone else want to jump in?
It's like trying to like remember the whole year, right? And make a list of like top 20 players. Most of the people won't even remember what happened in April or May. Like they just look at the last couple of weeks and months and they are able to remember that. But beyond that, they won't even be able to do that. So when recruiting, they just go, who looks the best like in this couple of things that I still remember, instead of thinking over a period of time. So, yeah.
And by the way, this is why like players like Hobbit, for example, is really impressive for me. Just because if you have a look over last 4 years, he was major winner. Then he was on the bottom, basically. Not like the bottom, but he was not in top tier in CIS. And then after this, he's back on top again. And I think it's one of the hardest thing to do. You don't have so many examples of a player who had like big down in terms of his performance or his teams and managed to get back on top again. This is what ridiculous for me.
Does anyone else have a topic? Do another? Maybe we'll do one last topic. Someone
what
have
do you
one?
think of his move to K Corp? Basically,
I don't know how much we can talk about that. We can try. Basically, the problem with that move is, like, that is actually a garbage move in the sense that it doesn't matter if you win. Basically, if people don't know, one of the most tenured players in European League of Legends history, who was literally one of the MVPs last year, should technically still be on a team in the top tier, which is LEC, the European League. But because none of them wanted to buy him or were willing to pay the buyout or just wanted him, bizarrely, he's ended up playing sort of in the best tier 2 team in Europe. And so even though this tier 2 team actually probably is better than some of the LEC teams at the bottom,
yes.
Obviously, it's a closed circuit, so you can't play against them. The best you can do in Tier 2 is win Tier 2 tournaments. So it means he won't be going to Worlds. No one knows if he'll return to the LEC. So I actually personally think it's a tragedy. Like, he's definitely a good enough player to be in LEC. He's better than most of the players in LEC and LCS at his position. So to me, there's a lot of fuckery with it, but I'll also add this in. This is in some ways a lot of comeuppance as well, though, because all those fans who thought I was making it up, I mean, why the fuck would someone who is known to have never lied professionally make up stories about a Swedish kid playing League of Legends video game for 10 years? Why would someone do that? Like, to me, that's a fucking stupid-ass premise. But obviously, I was never making it up. I was getting all this information from his teammates, from people who knew him, from people who were his rivals for all these years. And basically, I think the hens have come home to roost, as we say in England. Now that people have seen what G2 was like with him, they've seen that he didn't fuck with the culture at all. And they now know that Jankos and Caps don't want this guy on their squad and were willing to take an absolute guy who's never been a top pro as the replacement. I think that rubbed off on some of the other teams, and the other teams were also sort of like, I don't want to play with this fucking guy. Fuck it, get the rookie or get some other guy who was just good last year. Like, unfortunately, I think in a weird way, just people just aren't into Reckless this year. So I actually think that team, to me, the problem is I don't really give a fuck about the RLs, mate. Like, I find it hard enough to care about some of the LCS and LEC teams. So even though it's a cool team actually on paper, like they have another very good player in Kabashard who used to be an LEC player, definitely should also be an LEC. He actually could have been, but he chose not to be.
Yeah.
I actually do think, like, as a team, it's an interesting premise. The problem is, I do think, like, there's only a couple of really good teams in the LFL. They'll probably win that. Maybe they win EU Masters, a bit more of a crapshoot. But, I mean, to me, it just kind of kills the storyline. There's no ending. Like, it can't have a really big ending, I don't think.
Maybe they, I believe there is a clause in LEC and LCS that if a team underperforms consistently, they can actually kick that team out.
That's not happening.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
probably not. But like,
here's the problem.
In theory.
Here's the problem. Why would they want to kick the team out?
Well,
Like you just said it there because you're underperforming, right? But here's the problem. LEC right now is a league of 10 people that have bought in for 10 million euros.
Yeah, it's true.
So if I buy in for 10 million euros, what? And then in 2 years you go like, get the fuck out. It's like, well, no, I don't think so, mate. I mean, first of all, you'd make the money off selling the spot anyway.
Yeah.
But like, that won't be happening. Riot doesn't care about any of that shit, mate. That's just lies they tell the public. It's like Astralis. They just tell you what they think you want to hear and then they go and do whatever they're going to do
That's
anyway.
true. That's
You
right.
know?
The publicly knowledge contract clause is supposed to be 4 to 5 splits of 10th to 9th, which is like
By the way,
impossible. to
think
do.
what an utterly absurd premise that is as well. So basically, if I finish 10th 3 times and then I come 7th 2 times. Oh, sorry, the clause didn't activate. I don't think people realise in best of 1 how insanely bad your team would have to be to actually come 10th all those times. Like you can even, as Astralis did this last year, you can even trip over and win a bunch of games accidentally and not finish 10th.
True.
You know, because if people don't know, on paper, Astralis had like the worst lineup in LEC and they never finished last place in any of the splits. As far as I can remember, I think they were like 7th or 8th each time.
I think that such structure with franchise leagues is killing a little bit competitive.
Oh, of course. Mate, that was the whole argument we all made against it at the beginning. Like, what's hilarious is there's actually a video you could watch on this that's hilarious. Where, do you happen to know, Alex, a guy called Bryce Blum? He's an American lawyer.
A little bit. I have some background, but not like very big. To be
Basically, he's probably the most famous esports lawyer, right? And there was a show I did. It wasn't one of my shows. You can go look it on YouTube. Just put in, like, Dr. Puppet, Bryce Blum, Thorin. There was a show I did a few years ago. And it was before LCS became a franchise league, when it was just, like, still being discussed as a premise. And no joke, the Bryce Blum guy, for obvious reasons, he works with teams, etc. He just gives all these positives of franchise leagues and the American way. And all I do is I try to explain in a million different ways why every one of them is wrong. And look, obviously I can't decide who wins it, but I think I'd destroy the guy completely. So the worst thing about a franchise league is that it will destroy raw competition, because the idea is if you're better than me, you don't get in the league by beating me if you don't have a spot and if I do have a spot. So in that scenario, my team basically has to recruit you. But why would they recruit you when we haven't played yet? So you haven't beat me. So that's always going to be the flaw in the franchise league. Now, the people who like franchise leagues, like my mate Lurpis, they would just say that's also a flaw of the team, though, isn't it? Like, if you actually had the best talent scout, then he would, in theory, pick the best person. And therefore, having a franchise league, if it helps us all make more money, means you could afford the talent scout, which means you would get the talent. So the problem is, I think that's a little bit too utopian. Like, you see, things are very rarely like idealized and optimized like that in esports, especially. So I personally am not a big fan of franchise leagues. I think they're pretty whack in most games, mate.
We mostly get a clown show first before they actually try and solve things, sadly.
And let's be real, the one I worked with, Flashpoint's probably the ultimate example, right? Almost every team didn't buy the right players because they didn't need to. They're already in the franchise league.
I think that basically is like the main issue with franchises is it becomes driven by owners, not by competitors. And if I'm an owner and I've already paid, let's say, 10 million for a slot, why would I have to pay more money to get better players, like best players to compete on top tier, if at the same time I just bought the slot and I don't care? It's basically, and all the transfers are based on money. So you demotivate owners to invest like any kind of big amount of money until this like top tier org, which is getting money from some kind of advertisement or something like this. And this is the main issue for me with franchises.
That's also the area where I can't just be a purist like I normally am, because I know enough about the industry. I can't really say to the teams, don't do franchise leagues, when at the moment they just lose loads and loads and loads of money, and the stupid players get paid enormous amounts of money and don't even understand that they're actually the ones bleeding the industry dry. So if the owner says, well, the only path I have to one day make more money is to be in a franchise league, I get it. Someone has to sacrifice. At the moment, they sacrifice their money. Not really their money. They get other people to sacrifice investor money. But at the same time, it's the money they raised. You know, the player couldn't raise that money. So the problem is at the moment, just pragmatism means you have to sort of go some of these routes. It's why I told people, and people think I was joking, if Flashpoint or something like it didn't succeed, Counter-Strike isn't going to be around for the future. That might sound mad because we just had like record players, record viewership. That's short-term stuff.
Yeah.
Like, think about the discussions we had at the beginning of this conversation. Half of those things you're never going to get around without more resources, more money, more investment, like building up. We're going to have to build up the local scenes, and we're going to have to build up a scouting, an academy system, and have academy leagues. And, there's a million things we need. Well, how can we tell these teams to spend more money when they're already losing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars? Like, it's just tough to do.
And sadly, all those things Duncan just mentioned also cost money.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the
Exactly.
same point of time, one of the other problems I do have with franchise leagues is basically this is killing secondary tier scene, and it's killing competitive process as it is. Just because, let's say in 4 years, what will you have in terms of players? Who will perform? You'll have like majority of the proven names and very little amount of newcomers. Just because if I'm a pro player and let's say I'm thinking or even if I'm a youngster, and when I'm thinking what kind of discipline to take, and I see like this franchise, and I see how difficult to get to like top tier, why should I pick it? It's really hard for newcomers to get into it, and basically you are bleeding out in terms of like players as discipline, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Do we have anyone else got any more thoughts?
Yes, for me, just even more agree, just because Reckless himself, just by the socials and all that jazz, is probably worth the money. I mean, it's literally a model for the Ralph Lauren commercials they did. I mean, he's, anytime he does something, goes to the front page of the subreddit, which basically almost no one else apart.
Here's the thing, though, mate. Think about what that implies about the fucking other orgs, though. Like, there's a reason Carlos calls some of the LEC orgs parasites. Like, they're just garbage at everything. They don't put good teams out. They don't coach the teams well. They don't scout players well. They don't market well. They don't do anything. They're just in the league like Astral's doing fucking nothing, wasting everyone's time. So the problem I have is this. I agree with you. On paper, that is one of the most marketable players in all of esports. So what that means is, if that isn't worth anything to you, it's because you can't extract that value. Like, I would guess off the top of my head, mate, if he went to Rogue, Mad Lie, if he went to these teams, they probably wouldn't be able to actually get those deals. They haven't got the skills. Remember, here's another thing people misunderstand. The skill set that people like Carlos and Jack and fucking Steve from Team Liquid have, they have some skill set in recruiting players and running teams. Their main skill set is selling sponsorships. Look at the fucking incredible job they've done raising money, getting sponsorships, building fan culture, building a following, being in all the relevant games, being a power mover and shaker in the scene. Like, those skills have nothing to do with the game. So unfortunately, I think some of the other orgs also just aren't competent. I don't think they, like a team like an XL, I don't think they'd have any clue what to do with Reckless, mate. I think they'd probably do nothing, It's my feel, at least.
As one of the samples, when like as an organization which doesn't have like really good esports results, but still have really solid marketing, is TSM actually. And in my opinion, TSM as an organization which needs to sell contracts and regional as CEO is made a really great job in terms of it. And
that's because TSM
even
is
better than many of others.
That's because TSM is not a org, but a cult.
Temple.
Yeah, I would say that's more to do with like the website and the streaming side,
Yeah, they also won for many years in one of the biggest regions. So, I mean, that helps. These new guys don't have that. even Rogue and Mad Lions, they can be first all they want. They still don't get the success. So why don't they jump at this? It is really insane to me.
Right, Matt and Joshua, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess right on the K Corp thing is if this like helps push Riot to do any sort of stuff that's like between leagues, region leagues. You talked about like the Kespa Cup. I don't know what's the actual one, but where like the top of the ERLs would play against the bottom of the LCS.
Yes,
I think that would be like if Reckless being in the second tier promotes that type of tournament.
Shall I tell you something this is where I actually am needed for the scene, just to kill everyone's vibe
That is sadly
completely.
not true.
Here's the bad news for you, mate. Here's why Riot wouldn't do a tournament like that. Which would, listen, remember, competitively, it'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? Here's why Riot wouldn't do it. Because if my business partner pays me 10 million euros, why am I going to tell him, oh, by the way, between the two splits, I'm just going to let a bunch of the best semi-pro teams play you and make you look like a fool? You get the premise?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I think Riot would protect the Astralises, the XLs, the SK Gamings of the world, and wouldn't let that happen. Because put it this way, if I had to pick, if that happens, if they had a tournament like that, like let's say the top 4 teams from the EU Masters play against the bottom 4 from LEC, I think personally K-Corp would butcher some of these LEC teams, mate. So I think it'd just be bad for everyone, unfortunately, except K-Corp. So even though competitively it's a great idea, this is again where the compromises that you do, if you want to go the business route and the entertainment route, they sort of do. I mean, there's a cost to everything, isn't there? So unfortunately the cost there is you can't allow true competition in that sense. This video was kindly supported by Iskander, Lager15, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Zack Schmidt, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Chronic Alcoholism, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and of course, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion and DZL. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want to ask me a question? Maybe you want to know who the guests are for my upcoming content, or you'd like to take part in one of those long donated discussions. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.